the Baloch are so nervous and unhappy with the Pakistani state. Now, I don't see, when they say fragility, I don't see Pakistan breaking up. It's like I have a paralysis in my arm. The arm is still stuck to my body, but I can't use it. That kind of a thing. So, Balochistan remains part of Pakistan without feeling to be part of Pakistan, because the state of Pakistan and its military doesn't treat it like that.
Thank you, Ms. Siddiqa, for joining us today. I would like to call you Professor Siddiqa, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
So, Professor Siddiqa, my first question to you is, well, the book's been out for a while now. The second edition came out in 2016. So, if you could give our listeners and viewers a brief in a brief understanding of how relevant the arguments that you've drawn in the book, especially concerning the internal economy of the military, how relevant would some of the arguments of your book still be today in 2024? We have a postscript till 2016, but if you can catch up the viewers between 2016 to 2024, how relevant is Milbus still in Pakistan? So that would be the first question that we could begin with.
Sure. Thanks for the invitation. See, firstly, let me say that I'd begun to look at military business, which is something which I understood later, as I studied it more, was a different genre of military capital. It doesn't become part of the defense budget. And as I understood it, as I started working on it, initially started working on it with the Bonn International Center for Conversion. And there, the research group leader, his emphasis was this was more to do with corruption, and this was more to do with a few at the top making money. And as I understood it more as I studied it, I realized that this was not really just an issue of corruption. It was about the nature of the state itself. And I also realized that this was something which was happening in a number of countries in different ways. So from United States to United Kingdom to Germany to Israel to Iran to China, Thailand, Myanmar, and Pakistan. So firstly was an issue of understanding that military business itself is a different genre of military capital. And in wherever it happens, it is predatory. It takes away money from the public sector towards the private sector, and that too for the gratification of select group of people. Another thing is that it's all done in the name of welfare. And I started to then look at in more detail, not just at this economy, but also its impact politically, for the economy, for the military itself, military profession. And the idea behind writing Military Inc. was to understand that. And so what I developed was, for my first edition, which is also part of the second edition, is look at military business around the world and link it with different models of civil military relations around the world. So when it happens in the United States, for example, or in China or in Iran, this is, where the political party system is strong, where the democratic system is strong, the military then piggybacks. In China's case, the Communist Party. In the United States, it's the private sector. In case of Pakistan, you have a military which is politically very strong. It doesn't need to piggyback. It does it on its own. So, and this is where an expression of military's autonomy, a sense of autonomy. And The impact, of course, is very deep on politics. And my argument was that militaries' autonomy, economic, financial autonomy, which is Milbiz is an expression of that, then converts into political strength. So it's more cyclic. Economic power leads to more political power, and then desire for um, more political power and economic power. So between 2016 and 2024, this is not reduced. I mean, this did come under discussion. I mean, 2007 is when there was this huge demonstration, lawyers' protest in Pakistan against General Musharraf. And while there was this protest happening, what we saw was, people raising slogans, raising slogans against military's economic power. We heard slogans like "ए वतन के सजीले जवानों, ये सारे रकबे तुम्हारे लिए हैं," uh, the soldiers, all the lands are for you. Basically, kind of satirizing this acquisition, the land acquisition by the military. And one had expected that perhaps the political government coming in power is going to change that relationship, but nothing happened. And what we've seen from 2017 onwards, I mean, so there were two things happening in Pakistan. One, 2007, there was a clear shift in the political formula, which is that governments were voted out, they were not booted out. Despite that elections being problematic, yet they were voted out. Uh, but none of the political governments were able to push back military's economic growth or its economic expansion. And so what we've seen is more land acquisition, more control of the economy. In fact, it has become a more formal control of the economy. So with Imran Khan government in 2018, a major shift that happened was that the army chief was included and became part of the strategic forum for economic decision making. And with 2024, the change in government, we have now the SIFC, the Special Investment Facilitation Council, which is in control of all economic planning. And it's the army chief who's a member of it. And also at the operational level, you have generals in control. And SIFC is supposed to, be organizing all resource distribution and all investment and all monies coming into the kitty. Uh, so the power has increased. Uh, Military's economic strength has increased, which means that its political strength has definitely increased. The other thing which I added in the second edition was I had two chapters, and one of the chapters that I added was titled From Military Ink to Media Ink. And this is something which I hope someday I can or somebody can work on, is looking at the power of narrative building. So anywhere where political control and economic control has to be wrested, I mean, the same goes for India in many ways, not the military, of course, but the political party here. Narrative, control of narrative is essential. And that is where management of the media, scaring the media, lashing out at the media, disciplining the media, in other words, becomes very critical. And that includes social media. I'll stop here.
Thank you, ma'am. Before we continue with the session, I would like to welcome Professor Amog Rai, Director of Research, Advanced Institute of Asia. He will be co-moderating the session. So, Professor, if you have, Ms. Professor Rai, if you have questions for ma'am, I think we can oscillate between the two of us and we can conversation going, sir.
Well, let's not oscillate. Okay, Siddiqa, I'm so sorry. There was some confusion in timing, etc. So I had to really rush from some place. But welcome to Asia. Um, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you a question that, having read your book in when it came out in 2007, and then the second edition when it came out, 2016, if one is not wrong. Is there a third edition that you're working on? You have a postscript that stops in 2016. A lot has happened in the last 8 years. That's question number one. And question number two, Pakistani military has become the biggest landlord. And there is a critical problem. If I'm not getting my facts wrong, then as of January 2024, the Pakistani military owns 12% of the land in the country. They are the biggest landlords in Pakistan. Climate change is a big problem. All the DHA infrastructure and colonies in different cities, they're the first ones to get flooded. So when it comes to uh, a military which is very entrepreneurial in nature and a very business-like, how are they looking at catastrophic risks like climate change, which hover around them? So, two questions from my side.
Right. See, firstly, military is one of the largest landowners. There are other government departments like Pakistan Railways, etc., which is part of the government, which is also one of the big landowners. I think the problem, which, as far as climate change is concerned, I mean, every year we have flooding in Sindh, we have flooding in Balochistan. Now, what has happened is that because of military's other infrastructure development, its industries, etc., and so this kind of negotiation between the right bank and the left bank of the Indus. So a lot of the industries have been positioned at a location where, and to protect which there are breaches done, resulting in flooding, which affects people, common people. And of course, the concern here is to protect the military infrastructure rather than the people. So this is what happens, as far as military's own thinking is concerned. The other thing is that climate change is something uh, they'll only look at if there is money coming, if there is money somewhere there. And the international community, despite uh, protests and requests by the Pakistan government, uh, the previous the caretaker foreign minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari had gone around. Sherry Rahman, who was one of the PPP senior ministers and in charge of climate change, she had also gone around requesting governments. I mean, her argument is that Pakistan is not one of the key, it's a key victim. It's not the creator of issues related with climate change. So therefore, there should be a fund established and Pakistan should benefit from it. So right now, I think the military is just watching, but when there's money, they'd be interested. Very recently, the US government kind of started, a fund which was for Pakistan's agriculture. And that's where they got interested. So if there's money, they'll be interested. If it's not, then they won't. Um, I think largely the problem with South Asian countries is that they are victims of climate change, but none of the governments are really seriously looking at carbon emissions, issues like carbon emission. Their argument is that the developed countries are biggest carbon emitters, and that's where things should be sorted out. But um, I think a lot of developing countries, definitely Pakistan, need to think more seriously about climate change.
Thank you. And is there going to be a third edition of this
Third
incredibly interesting?
edition, no, no. I'm working on another
Okay.
book, but not a third edition of Military Inc. I mean, I'm I'm kind of exhausted. This is somebody else needs to work on looking at Military Inc. I've produced theoretically what the work needed to be produced. People can work on it. People can add to it, and I think at policy making level, somebody needs to seriously look at the issue. Uh, it's a huge problem. It's not just about money getting diverted. It's not about resources being um, taken away. It's about power being built, a power that comes to eat into the political influence of political parties, political systems. It's very damaging, and I think more than anything else, it's very damaging for the military itself. It does eat into their professional instinct as well.
Right. When we think about the Pakistani military, there have been various operations on the internal front that have made it into perhaps the purveyor of internal security as Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted it to be. But what has been the impact in the last 4 years, specifically 2020 to 2024, when Taliban, which from 2020 to 2022 was trying to come back to power in Afghanistan, and post 2022 has been in power in Afghanistan. Do you think the military industrial complex, MILBUS, of the Pakistani military has not been as successful as in reading the Talibani intentions as some other professional militaries would have been without a desire or an interest to protect their entrenched business domains within Pakistan?
See, firstly, I don't know why you mentioned Muhammad Ali Jinnah. I don't know. Right now, one doesn't want. It's not clear what Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted with the nation. Uh, but Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the several speeches that we hear, he had advocated subservience of the military to civilian leadership, which didn't turn out to be. You know, uh, we lost him, lost Muhammad Ali Jinnah quite early, and then lost the first prime minister quite early.
The
And
reason I brought it up, Doctor, just to kind of make it clear, in my research for preparing for it, because I'm not a Pakistan hand, I'm a China hand, as they say. So there was a proposal that Mr. Jinnah had floated to the Americans, where he wanted almost $1 billion. $700 million of that was to go to social causes, but $300 million was to be divided equally between the armed forces of Pakistan, Navy, the Army, and of course, Air Force. So that's why I brought it up, because from that time onwards, money and Pakistani military slightly go hand in hand, like every other
that's,
professional
well,
military
as
force out
you
there.
as you said, you are a China expert, you're not a Pakistan expert. So let me kind of tutor you on that a bit, if you don't mind. See, that division, of course, is very natural. I mean, the circumstances in which Pakistan got its independence, there were issues of assets. There were assets, there were limited assets which were transferred from India to Pakistan. So therefore, Uh, and at that time, and soon after, 47, 48, while Jinnah was still alive, we had our first war between India and Pakistan. And therefore, resources had to be provided to the military. So this was a civilian leader. Uh, we can have other issues with Jinnah, but a civilian leader who wanted to strengthen the military. If you're next door to a large neighbor with whom you have antagonistic relations, you would have uh, want to build your armed forces. So that's the context of that division. What happened later was weakening of the political class and uh, much more the partnership with the United States, which kind of build the military on the one hand, but uh, no similar capacity building of the political classes. So that's where one of the problem lies. Uh, so overall, and later on, and I think it's a conflict which provided the logic for military to strengthen itself. Now, going to uh, the Taliban and the relationship with the Taliban, you know, if we look at military history around the world, fighting insurgencies successfully, I mean, it's a very difficult task. Uh, be it India and Kashmir, or be it United States and Vietnam, definitely in Vietnam, or the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. When you don't have local support and when you don't have people's sympathy, it's very difficult to fight um, these kind of conflicts. Uh, Now, sadly, the Taliban issue is far more complex as far as Pakistan and Pakistani military is concerned. And the problem has been that because of its obsession, military's obsession with India, it had always wanted to encourage the Taliban. It wanted control. I mean, this absolute obsession with uh, and fear of India. Because if you just to remind you historically, Afghanistan was the only country which went against giving Pakistan membership in the United Nations. So this is way back the 47, 48. And so there was this animosity and there was this fear of a two-front war. Currently the kind of two-front war that India is worried about as far as Pakistan and China is concerned. So Pakistan was worried about a two-front, uh, that whenever there is a war, there will be a second front from Afghanistan. Afghanistan was antagonistic, closer to Delhi, etc., etc. So this obsession with how do you have a friendly government in Kabul, and when the United States and its allies left in post withdrawal of Soviet Union from Afghanistan and later breakup of Afghanistan, Pakistan military thought it was an opportunity. So there were operations launched. Firstly, there was this one set of Mujahideen, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, Rabbani, Sayaf, a whole lot of leaders, Mujahideen leaders who had been trained in Pakistan going back to 1975, even before the Soviet invasion in 1979. But these leaders proved ineffective, and meanwhile, another movement took place in Afghanistan in the form of the Taliban with the students. I mean, all of them, Mullah Omar, etc., got uh, their education, religious education, in seminaries in Pakistan. So they went back, and the Pakistani military and the ISI took benefit from it, and rest is history. So what we have during 1996, what started Taliban established themselves as a single biggest group that could maximize control of Afghan territory. And this is where it was until 9/11 happened. Uh, Now, after 9/11, again, the expectation was that United States is going to leave ultimately. It's going to come, it bombed. Uh, but then United States extended its stay. And Pakistani military's understanding was that it's going to leave. Now, it didn't leave, but it did leave. And that is what Pakistan's fear was. So, from a military perspective, the understanding was that these guys are going to leave. United States is going to leave. And once it leaves, who do we fall back on? So Taliban were the only ones it wanted to trust. Pakistan has had this another fear, and that fear is of Pashtunistan. The non-religious forces across the border. I mean, you have what is interesting is that the Durand line is a frontier, it's not a border. And that is one kind of issue between Kabul and Islamabad. Be it a Taliban controlled Kabul or, an Ashraf Ghani, Karzai controlled Kabul. I mean, for the Afghans, it's an emotional issue. You have the same tribes, living on both sides of the border. And so Pakistan military has kind of adjusted its expectation. So its initial expectation was kind of have political control over Afghanistan, the whole theory of strategic depth. Basically, and when strategic depth was initially imagined, it was the Taliban who would, be an additional infantry in case of a conflict with India. They would come and help. This is in 1990s. That's how it was imagined. Later on, when things got out of control, now the expectation is that a friendly government in Afghanistan and the Pashtuns in the north staying north of the border and the south staying south of the border. Now, but what has happened is that in 2007 and after 2007, the military governments or the military leaders were trying to convince United States to accept Taliban as a force. I mean, who else would have better control in their minds, better control of Afghanistan? So you have Taliban, you have Americans accept the Taliban, have negotiations, as had happened after 1996. Let's not forget that between 1996 and 9/11, a lot of international companies, Western governments had come close to almost recognizing the Taliban. There were businesses which were being negotiated. There were, mobile companies, French included, that had landed in Afghanistan, which were a negotiation. I mean, had 9/11 not happened, there would have been a more legitimization of the then Mullah Umar controlled Taliban regime. Of course, after 9/11, lots has changed. There is ISIS, there is Al Qaeda, which Pakistan helped the United States fight, but trying to also sit in the middle of negotiating between Taliban and United States. Now, this negotiation, which we saw Doha process, let's recognize that there are two problems which emerged. One was United States exiting in a very ugly fashion. No concern for Afghan women, children, all of that. Very kind of snap, quick exit. Uh, Obama kind of announced it, then went back. Biden just expedited the entire process. Now, and they were independently talking, of course, Doha process started it. Uh, they were talking to the Taliban. So the entire conversation, Pakistani military, forget about Pakistan, Pakistani military wanted to be, this person in the room negotiating between different uh, people, the Taliban, Kabul, and Washington. But that conversation has completely gone out of control, their control. And now the Taliban sitting in Kabul, they're independently talking to the United States, they're talking to um, India, they're talking to China. So they're having their own conversations and not dependent on Pakistan. And this is where the new military regime, new military regime in Pakistan has started to now look at the Northern Alliance. They're talking to Ahmad Shah Massoud's son. Now you see military trolls talking about how bad the Taliban are and how they're beating up women, etc., etc. I mean, for God's sake, this is exactly the kind of people they were eulogizing and they were um, fantasizing, before the breakup happened. And I think part of the problem is that the security issue has now become big. The TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which are very connected with the Afghan Taliban, because they fought for them, and the Afghan Taliban can't drop them. They desire to have their kind of Sharia and their kind of control um, in Pakistan. Now, this is a issue which is problematic for all. It's problematic for China. In fact, recently China gave warning to the Afghan Taliban to control the TTP. It is Pakistan is a problem with it. So does United States, because there is a constant, seepage of these warriors from the TTP going to ISIS. You can't really have a clean divide. But in the middle of all of that, Pakistan has a real security problem. And so recently the military started a new operation. With the joke that's going around is that it's again, perhaps, I mean, of course, security is one angle, but the other is it's about milking or accessing global rents. Um, I think one of the biggest developments post American exit from Afghanistan is that it's the first time that global rents, Pakistan is not receiving global rents. Uh, there's also been a shift in American strategy from looking at, purely at Afghanistan and Soviet Union and Russia to, the larger, much bigger Indo-Pacific strategy. Russia, China, etc., mainly China. Now, that makes Pakistan irrelevant in certain ways. It's still relevant for the US, but it's largely irrelevant. So, how do you get access to global rents in some form? They're not going to be huge, but has to be something. So, if you're going to fight the TTP, and the problem is that with this new operation, there's no money in the pockets in National Kitty. Yet, the defense budget, 310, 20 billion rupees has been added, 18% increase. And there is expectation that perhaps, if there's a successful operation, maybe China is going to give something. China is really concerned about what it faces in terms of its security in Pakistan, or the US would give something. So this is where the military, military's economic ambitions and its geopolitical and political ambitions all come together. Sorry for this long answer.
No, no, thank you. It's been very illuminating. A lot of these things I did not know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to request Priyanka to have the next question. Priyanka, go ahead, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. That was a very insightful answer to a very pertinent question. Now, my second question to you is Pakistan is often regarded as a fragile state internationally. It fails a lot of markers. So, what are some of the contributing factors to it, and how important is the military in ensuring this fragility, if I may say so? We've seen Shahbaz Sharif come to power in recent times in an election that is largely considered not free and fair. The US Senate has voted to look into the electoral processes in the country as well. Are we seeing how important is the civil military relationship in the present government? Like, are we seeing the military still have a say in all of this? Is Pakistan still a fragile state because the military wants it to be fragile? What are your views on this?
You know, fragility is very complex. And if you look closely at South Asia, all all countries are that way fragile. Because what has happened is that you've not managed to kind of build the you know uh, build the kind of states, solid, strong states, according to which were imagined on the basis of the Westphalian formula, Westphalian formula. I mean, in many ways, let me jump the gun and or jump the queue and say that I feel that all South Asian states right now are very unnatural. Um we have multiple nationalities living under one states. South Asia technically is these are state nations, not nation states. So fragility comes naturally. But I think there are three problems which have remained with Pakistan and continue. Uh, from very early years, political stability or instability is the largest problem. And the heart of that sits the civil military relations. And I would argue that, it's partly, of course, you know, let me share with you this, you'd find it, uh, funny. So when I was researching Military Inc., my book, I could, for the life of me, I mean, I could understand why the military, there is this greed, want more money. Of course, it's very simple, common sense. But for the life of me, I couldn't understand why leader after leader has given in to military's greed. Why do they contribute to it? Why do they go back talking to the military? Of course, it's the most powerful institution. The common sense argument would be it's the most powerful institution. Of course, you have to, uh, go back and talk to them. Uh, but why this pampering, right? Why do you give them more? I'll give you an example. I mean, for instance, 2000, I mean, the hybridity, my argument is hybridity didn't start with Imran Khan in 2018. It started with Nawaz Sharif in 2013. And hybridity needs to be defined. It's not about just about civil military control. It's about how decision making is shared. Decision making for me is central. So, for example, 2013, Nawaz Sharif government reinstituted So 2008, when democracy was kind of revived, there was PPP government. They had, in 2006, both Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif had sat in London, signed the Charter of Democracy, and one of the things was that decision making will go back from the National Security Council to the Cabinet Committee for Defense. The formula, which is there in British parliamentary democracy, you have it in India, we had it in Pakistan. Which means that you go back to parliamentary control of military decision making. 2013, Nawaz Sharif government comes and changes it, makes Cabinet Committee for Defense redundant, and brings in the National Security Committee, which is essentially the National Security Council, where the four generals, the Army Chief, the Naval Chief, the Air Chief, and Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, are equal members. You start sharing in partnering. The other thing which happens is that despite protests from the Senate, from the the Special Committee of the Senate on National Security, despite protests from that, military land and cantonment, which is one of the 11 services of the civil service of Pakistan, is given under military control. It's given for 2 years, never taken back. So you're giving your own hands. Why? And I remember I was in Washington doing theoretical research for Military Inc. And one day, it was a weekend, and I decided to go and see, go to the museum. Went to the Natural History Museum, and as I was passing through the section on dinosaurs, just held my head and I sat down. I was like, oh, damn. So that's what it is. It's predatory behavior. And, there is a whole theoretical formula of predation. It means no loyalties, no permanent ideologies, short-term gains. So you're batting for very short-term gains. So that's where the problem lies. That even political decision makers do not see long-term. They're looking at small gains. We come to power, we make gains, and फिर पीछे कर लेंगे military को. We'll push them back. But there's no pushing back. You can't. And therefore, when I looked at Military Inc. and Milbiz and this, this entanglement of politics and economics, I realized that we also needed to look very carefully at this whole civil-military divide problem in Pakistan. It's not just about civil versus military. It's also about a whole elite gang, which includes civilians, which benefit from this military economy, that against the people of Pakistan. So civil-military divide itself is very complex. So that's problem number one. And because of that, you have another problem, which is constant, which is how does the state treat its federating units? The issue of missing persons, which has enhanced. The Baloch, are so nervous and unhappy with the Pakistani state. Now, I don't see, when they say fragility, I don't see Pakistan breaking up. But I don't see Pakistan breaking up. In one ways, I feel it's emotionally broken up, but physically, it's going to remain intact because the international environment, international players, regional players, nobody benefits from breaking up of Pakistan. So it's like I have a paralysis in my arm. The arm is still stuck to my body, but I can't use it. That kind of a thing. So Balochistan remains part of Pakistan without feeling to be part of Pakistan, because the state of Pakistan and its military doesn't treat it like that. Again, Sindh. Sindh is treated in a certain way. Again, Sindh is no desire. I mean, Sindh with the PPP has been very central to kind of keeping Sindh part of Pakistan. But again, the negotiating point is if Mr. Zardari continues to control it and have his control and have power, he won't challenge Pakistan. But that sets in a fragility right there. KP, I mean, KP doesn't desire to. I mean, who in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa wants to kind of go and shift to Kabul? Environment here is much better. They're not going anywhere. So physically, politically, it's intact, but it's very unhappy. You have military operations. You have people getting thrown out of homes. Issue of IDPs. You bring in the Taliban, you then fight against the Taliban. Who gets affected? The people on the ground. And in middle of that, a third problem that was inherently part of Pakistani character of Pakistani state, but has now completely gone out of control. It's religion. Pakistan was never meant to be a secular state. Our liberals keep arguing, no, Jinnah wanted a secular state. I'm sorry, that's a redundant debate. Jinnah was liberal, wasn't secular, but this entire leadership, be it Ayub Khan, Jinnah, Liaquat Ali Khan, they were all liberal citizens or people, leaders who were liberal because they were accustomed to Western liberalism. They were, let's not forget that all our leaders in India and Pakistan were at one point in time citizens of the imperial state of Britain. And, the environment, of course, was therefore was liberal. But, as kind of the state's use of religion increased with years, religion now has become a problem. On this Eid, the way the houses of Ahmadis was invaded, the way recently a tourist was a local tourist. When we say tourist, it's like a foreign tourist, no, a local tourist was burned to death. So the fear, so all of that is making the society and its politics unstable, emotionally very fragile. Pakistan is emotionally a very fragile state. And I'd be lying if I'd say it's not. We want it to be together, 250 million people or more. It is home. You want it to be strong, but, an unstable politics doesn't give citizens the sense of ownership to participate in building a stronger nation. And we're not there.
Indeed. Thank you for that answer, ma'am. I would like to pick your brain on the first point that you made about the leadership. Why does it submit to military rule time and again? And if we were to sort of connect it to, there's a comment you made in Military Enclave where you say that the Pakistani politicians cannot distinguish between a micro and macro rationality when it comes, and they serve their short term interests more. So, can we see this as a lack of political vision that the political leadership has for the country right now? So, are we saying, and this is something that Hussein Haqqani speaks, Sofian Talbot speaks of, does Pakistan not have a vision for where its country is supposed to be beyond these short term bargains that the elite leadership makes?
See, again, this is, the problem, of course, is that none of the parties, it's like, it's like, I know I have cancer, I know how to cure it, how it gets cured, right? But I'm then thrown from one hospital to the other, to the third, to the fourth. I never get this opportunity to sit somewhere and get my treatment done. That's where the problem is. I mean, these politicians are problematic, all of them. They need to, one could argue, they need to strengthen the political party system, uh, this, that, and the other. I mean, let me, for an Indian audience, look at a comparison in India. I mean, we keep saying that, there is a very strong BJP government. Now, to counter that, we understand the logic, the the opposition, especially the Congress party, has to kind of brush up its act, strengthen itself, but something stops it, whatever, it's not doing it, right? uh, it needs to strengthen itself, it needs to work, it needs to sort out its issues, etc., etc. So that's also true for Pakistan, except, I mean, the difference, that's where the difference lies with India, that these parties don't get, I mean, in some ways I laugh with my Indian friends that, you guys are luckier, you don't have a strong military, or maybe you're unfortunate. You can't blame it on the military. We can at least blame it on the military, that because of them, you're not managing to do it. So it's both ways. I mean, the political leadership has grown lazy, not kind of brushing up its act. I mean, for example, as far as civil military relations or civilian control of the military is concerned, there are a lot of things which they can do. I mean, the structural changes which they need to bring, which they're not doing. When you ask them, they're like, "Ye karne nahi denge," right? They will not allow us to do it. So there is already so much fear that I know the room is dark. I've opened the door, but I'm afraid that there may be some ghost or something, something. So I'm not even bothering to enter it, not taking the risk. Politically, they're not being the risk takers. But also, the fact is that the environment is such. The military, you have an environment where the military will photograph their judges, their children, make videos of, if they have love affairs. I mean, dig out material, they can always blackmail somebody, an individual in power. And, as an individual, as a human being, everybody has, you are not angels, you've done things, maybe even at a personal level. And the fact that somebody is snooping on you, the fact that somebody is chasing you, looking at you. So all of those factors are there. Fear is there. Uh, the fear of getting picked up, the fear of going missing. So now, I mean, the situation is even more pervasive than before. But the stability is just not there. I mean, Nawaz Sharif wasn't. I feel that one of the major shifts that happened in 2016, or sorry, 2007, which allowed governments to complete their parliaments to complete their term, is that it wasn't just the political governments, and I think it was definitely not the political government's initiative. The military decided something, and the military decided to shift away from control of the state to control of governance. So the formula is, you control governance, you have, and you control it also through encouraging instability. So not allow the parliament to complete, but not let prime ministers complete. So 2008 to 2013, you have two prime ministers. Yusuf Raza Gilani couldn't complete his term. It was Raja Parvez Ashraf and who completed the term. 2013 to 18, Nawaz Sharif couldn't complete his term. It was Shahid Khaqan Abbasi who did it. Imran Khan, 2018 to 2024, couldn't complete his term. There was vote of no confidence. He was thrown out. Again, I mean, the whole populism formula that was created, a populist was created in order to push back traditional parties. So the problem is that one can't say, no, these are all bad political parties, they have a problem. I think the elephant in the room is the military. I mean, Haqqani Saab can say whatever, political parties are bad, but I think without addressing the elephant in the room, you can't begin to look at how do you correct. 2008, there was a PPP government. It performed so bad. There was electricity load shedding. They weren't doing things well. They got voted out of Punjab. The PPP can't imagine coming back to Punjab because its performance was bad. Had they allowed a populist Mr. Imran Khan to complete his term, he would have been voted out. Right. Now we're stuck with him because, emotionally people believe that it was unfair to throw him out the way they did. So allow governments. I mean, one of the arguments they make in Pakistan whenever elections happen in India, especially 10 years ago, whenever elections happened and, India voted the way it did. So the argument would be, no, they have greater maturity. Abbe yaar, let the Pakistanis make the choice. They will develop that maturity. Why are we lesser or different from India? The people, they look at their interests, they vote. Let them vote. Let the governments complete their term. But that doesn't happen. And this is where I think the problem lies. That, yes, theoretically, very difficult to say, no, this is very difficult to apportion responsibility. As I had said earlier, that civil and military could also be the same, part of the same coin. But the fact is that a strong institution like the military has now, over 76 years, crowded out every single institution, from bureaucracy to judiciary to political parties. So if you crowd out institutions, you'll be left with nothing.
Thank you,
So,
ma'am.
Professor Siddiqa, we are now hitting into an hour mark. And last question from me, and I'm sure Priyanka might have other questions for you. But you said quite a few interesting things, and that I was hearing a podcast of yours in Urdu, and I think it was with somebody called, this gentleman must be called something else, but the name of the podcast was Times Glow.
Okay.
It was
Yeah.
about the Pakistani army, and you made some very interesting points. Something that stuck me then, and it still does now. You said that there is a certain hubris within the Pakistani military establishment that if Charles de Gaulle can run France, and if bunch of people can serve in the armed forces and then become House of Representatives members and senators and then go on to become presidents like Eisenhower, then we can also run the economy. It can't be that hard. And I would like to just connect it to something I read in Mr. Musharraf's autobiography, where he said that Pakistani military was a training ground for elite uh, to get into the elite institutions of Pakistan as a son of a migrant. Do you think, because you just talked about religion, do you think post Zia, the Pakistani military is not able to get or create the elites who can actually look at the larger picture, and they're looking at a very narrow picture of self-interest, and that is harming the Pakistan national interest?
Oh God, very complex question, but very interesting question. Thank you for that. See, firstly, Pakistani elite uh, come from different sources. Uh, you have the parliament, you have the political party system, where it's a lot to do with inheritance, your background. So land owning classes, industrialists, business, etc. They're there. Now, two institutions which are open to the less fortunate is the civil and military bureaucracy. And over years, the class composition, therefore, of the military has changed. So now you have less of, uh, you know, land-owning families or big families, which was initially the case with the military. Now you have urban or even rural middle class, even lower middle classes coming into both civil and military bureaucracy. Uh, Civil maybe, you know, a slight variation because you have bureaucrats, their children also joining the bureaucracy. So this is something which has happened. Now, of course, the background that you come from, you bring it with you. You bring your town or your village into your institution. And yes, as far as military is concerned, it's uh, that background reflects. I mean, that religiosity or that connection with religion does exist. But Pakistani military is a very interesting institution. Uh, we often joke about it that Pakistan military's religion or its nationalism is not Pakistan or Islam. It is the army itself. It creates its own shade, you know, make it lighter, make it stronger. So during, for example, Musharraf years, many of these jihadis, Masood Azhar, many others would be going lecturing in the Air Force and in the Navy, in the Army, and therefore you have influences that get picked up. and which also leads to trouble. So when in 2002 there was this two assassination attempts on Musharraf, they start digging out. I mean, I was talking to one of the former DG, Director Generals of FIA, Federal Investigation Agency of Pakistan, and he kind of joked. He said, at one point we thought that we had to shut down investigation, otherwise we would have to fire the entire Air Force. So there have been periods when these segments, these external elements have been allowed penetrate, kind of. So, for example, Hizbut Tahrir is kind of come and gone. But then you have phases where leaderships consider that no, we have to kind of keep them more neutral, less religious, and they kind of work on that. I think what is in one way saved Pakistan military is constant contact with the West. So in order to have that global presence and global relevance, relevance is the right word. So to maintain the global relevance, they realize they can't afford to be totally bigoted and Islamic. And so there is effort to then weed out the miscreants and make sure that they remain close to religion. I mean, all the religious or all militaries, motivating symbols in the military are religious. Religion is I mean, it's an Islamic state. We're not a secular state. So, but the tones of religion are then mellowed. So, for example, the current army chief, goes around reading out verses from the Quran to justify his pushback to Imran Khan. He says Quran says that you have to weed out the devils and the miscreants. And Imran is that. Reads out the verse from the Quran. But he will keep it at that. General Bajwa, the previous army chief, he was accused of being Ahmadiyya, from the Ahmadiyya sect of Islam. He struggled hard, to hold events, religious events, to portray himself as a Sunni Muslim. So even army chiefs have to kind of be mindful of the, kind of, there's a threshold at which they'd keep religion. So, for example, it was known about General Kiani, the one who kind of inherited the baton from Musharraf, took over from him, was that, his seniors would say, come and, you have to come and pray. And he wouldn't go. He wouldn't allow his seniors to force him to kind of conform to a certain exercise, which had been the case with under Ziaul Haq. Right? Ziaul Haq, they were monitoring who was praying, who was not praying, etc., etc. So I think, firstly, what's important is that, and I would argue that army chiefs have kind of struggled between conforming to the demands of creating and keeping an Islamic state. So, for instance, General Ayub Khan, who was considered to be secular, he was asked by the Saudis to not send Ahmadiyya army officers to Saudi. He complied. Ziaul Haq was asked the same by the Saudis, not to send Shias. He didn't comply. So he said, no, we are not organized on sectarian lines. Sorry, I can't entertain you. And this is somebody who's considered to be bigoted, Sunni Muslim, and all of that. So the point is that they will do one thing in order to keep country's politics aligned to religious values, because that's what they consider the politics of the state is. But when it comes to their own organization, they'll keep a certain threshold. They wouldn't let the military slip beyond that. But the fact of the matter is that this threshold also keeps getting revised. So there are pressures on that as well. They kept Osama bin Laden, they kept Mullah Omar, they have the Taliban, but what they make sure, and that in itself has created problems. There is part of the ISI which which believes more passionately in the Taliban project, which the shades of hawkishness are kind of very complex there. But the fact is that so far they have tried to maintain that. So generals after generals, army chiefs after army chiefs have struggled to then extricate the institution from where Ziaul Haq had left it.
Indeed. Thank you, ma'am.
That was a fascinating answer. Thank you so much for that.
With that, we'd like to end our session. Thank you, Professor Siddiqa, for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation. And thank you, Professor Rai, for co-moderating the session with me. Thank you, viewers, for being backstage and listening to us so patiently. Thank you. Everyone have a nice day, please. Thank you.